You're safe with me. Let's go." The words had barely left his lips when he bent down and lifted her into his arms, effortless, without asking. Layla gasped. Not from fear. From the shock of being seen, being touched, being carried when for so long she had carried herself. Her body didn't fight. It couldn't. After standing in the snow for nearly an hour, her legs had turned into stilts of ice. Her fingers were numb. Her breath came out in short, uneven puffs. She should have screamed, should have pulled away, should have protested, but all she managed was a faint blink, a trembling breath against his chest. Because deep down she knew. She didn't want to resist. Malcolm Brooks held her gently but with a quiet urgency. The kind that didn't need permission because it was clear this wasn't about power or pride. It was about not letting someone crumble alone. He had spotted her moments earlier from behind the windshield of his black Bentley, parked half a block away. Snow was falling in thick, deliberate sheets. The city had shut down almost an hour ago, but something had kept him out. Restlessness, maybe. That familiar ache that came when the night got too quiet. And then he saw her, slumped on a frozen metal bench at the bus stop near Commonwealth Avenue, wrapped in nothing but a thin lavender dress and a loose gray cardigan that had clearly lost its shape. Her knees were drawn close to her chest, her head tucked low, a broken silhouette beneath the streetlight. He had seen exhaustion before, had lived it, but this was something else. He parked without thinking. The moment he stepped out, the wind bit into his skin, sharp and fast, but he barely noticed. His focus locked on the girl who hadn't moved for minutes. When he got close, he saw the trembling in her shoulders. The way her shoes canvas flats, soaked through, had stiffened. Her lips were pale, cracked. Her phone was dead in her lap, screen black. He crouched down and spoke softly. "You're safe with me. Let's go." And when she didn't respond, not really when her head turned just slightly and her eyes tried to meet his through the flurry, he didn't wait. He scooped her up with care, like someone might handle glass that had already cracked. She didn't even ask where he was taking her. Her head dropped softly against his chest, cheek resting just above the lapel of his coat. She was light, too light. A deeply cinematic and soul-stirring moment for anyone who's ever been silently exhausted. If you've ever felt worn down but still managed to stand on your own, give this video a like to send Layla some strength. And comment where you're watching from. Someone just like you might be quietly watching too. Inside the car, warmth greeted them like a tide. The heater hummed gently. Classical music drifted low from the speakers, and Malcolm carefully buckled her in before walking around to the driver's side. Layla's eyes fluttered open, barely. "You didn't have to." "I know," he said quietly, starting the car. "But I did." They drove in silence. The snow clung to the windshield, and the world outside blurred into a canvas of white and amber. Inside the cabin, it smelled of leather and eucalyptus. Layla's breathing began to steady. "I missed the last bus," she mumbled. "I was tutoring near Dorchester. Thought I could make it. Guess I was wrong." He nodded. "Happens to the best of us." She tilted her head, voice faint. "You always go around picking up strangers?" "No," he said. "Just the ones freezing to death in party dresses." A tiny sound left her a half laugh, half sob. She didn't know which part of her had made it. "What's your name?" he asked. "Layla." "Nice to meet you, Layla. I'm Malcolm." "Malcolm," she repeated as if testing it. Then, "Where are we going?" "Somewhere warm. Safe. Not far." She didn't answer, just leaned back into the seat. The coat he'd wrapped around her smelled like cedar wood and something steadier, something that said, "You can rest now." And for the first time in days, she did. Her eyes closed, her breathing slowed, the cold receded, and Malcolm Brooks kept driving through the falling snow, not as a rescuer, not as a hero, just a man who once stood in the dark and now refused to let someone else do the same. The apartment door swung open with a quiet click, and warmth rushed to meet them like a hush of velvet. Layla blinked against the sudden shift from the pale cruelty of the storm into the soft, golden interior that glowed with life. Her body still shivered as Malcolm carried her across the threshold, careful with every step. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The living room was large, but not extravagant. Wooden floors gleamed under the soft light of recessed fixtures. A long gray couch sat facing a stone fireplace that crackled gently, casting dancing shadows across a minimalist coffee table. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering city skyline beyond, dimmed by the snowstorm still raging outside. Malcolm lowered her gently onto the couch, placing a folded throw blanket over her legs. She reached for it instinctively, fingers still clumsy. He disappeared for a moment, and when he returned, a steaming cup of something nestled in his hand. "Ginger tea," he said, crouching beside her. "No caffeine. It'll warm you up." Layla took it carefully, her hands brushing his. She hated how cold her skin felt against his, hated feeling like a burden. But the warmth of the cup seeped into her fingers like sunlight, and the first sip made her throat burn in the best possible way. "You didn't have to do all this," she said softly, not looking at him. He stayed crouched, arms resting loosely on his knees. "I didn't do anything heroic. I just didn't want you to die in the snow." Layla gave a faint laugh. "Well, when you say it like that," he smiled, only slightly. Then he stood and walked toward the kitchen. She let her eyes wander. The place was quiet, still. Books lined a low shelf beneath the window. A record player sat beside them. On the wall above the fireplace hung a single black-and-white photograph, an older woman in scrubs, smiling in front of what looked like a small clinic. Layla stared at the photo for a long time. There was something about the way it was framed, the way it held space on the wall, not as decoration, but as memory. "She was a nurse," Malcolm's voice said behind her. Layla turned. He was leaning against the kitchen doorway, a dish towel in one hand. "My mother," he continued. "She worked in community clinics most of her life, passed when I was 17. "I'm sorry," Layla said gently. He nodded once, then stepped forward and handed her a plate, simple, just toast with almond butter and sliced banana. But to Layla, it might as well have been a 5-star meal. She hadn't eaten since lunchtime, and her body reminded her now with sharp clarity. She muttered a thank you and took a bite. Warmth returned to her chest in waves. Malcolm sat on the armrest of a nearby chair, watching her without intruding. The silence stretched again, but like the car ride, it wasn't empty. It was peaceful. "After a while," she said, "I tutor kids in the evenings. I had a full day of classes and 2 sessions tonight. Didn't mean to stay that long, but the youngest was struggling with long division. Couldn't leave him like that." "And you always help people, even when it costs you?" he asked. She hesitated, chewing slowly. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do?" He didn't answer right away. "I don't think most people remember that part." They sat for a moment, just letting the crackle of the fire speak for them. Then she asked, "What do you do? I mean, when you're not scooping up strangers from bus stops?" He chuckled under his breath. "I run a tech firm, education software. Started in Baltimore. We build tools for underfunded schools. It got bigger than I expected." Layla blinked. "Wait, you're Malcolm Brooks?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Guilty. I've read about your company in EdTech Review. One of my professors mentioned it." He shrugged. "It's just software." "No, it's access," she corrected, setting her plate down. "You're helping teachers who've been drowning for decades." Malcolm looked at her, then really looked. There was no awe in her tone, just sincerity. She hadn't Googled him or made assumptions. She saw the work. That unsettled him more than he expected. "You should rest," he said suddenly, standing. "There's a guest room down the hall. Bed's made. Closet's got some old sweatpants and shirts you can borrow. They'll be big, but clean." Layla stood slowly. Her legs still ached, but the tea and food had helped. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Lock the door if you want. I'll be out here." She studied him, not because she didn't trust him, but because something about him felt unfinished, like a man who hadn't let anyone truly speak his name aloud in a long time. "Thank you, Malcolm," she said simply. He didn't respond, just gave a slight nod and turned away. The guest room was small but warm, pale sheets tucked perfectly over a firm mattress. A faint lavender scent lingered in the air. Layla changed into an oversized t-shirt and sweatpants. Her own clothes hung damp over a chair by the window. She climbed into bed, burying herself in the blankets, and stared at the ceiling. It had been so long since she'd felt safe. Not comfortable, not polite, safe. The storm continued outside, but inside, there was only breath and firelight. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she let her body go still, and sleep took her with a gentleness that felt, for once, like grace. The morning light crept in slow and quiet, like someone trying not to wake the house. Layla stirred beneath layers of soft blankets, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the unfamiliar ceiling. For a moment, she didn't remember where she was. Then she caught the faint scent of cedar and toast lingering in the air, and it came rushing back: the snow, the bus stop, the stranger's coat, the tea, the warmth. She sat up slowly. Her muscles ached from the cold and strain of the night before, but the deep kind of ache that made her realize just how long she'd been carrying too much. She glanced at the folded clothes on the nearby chair. Her soaked dress was now dry, neatly hung, pressed with a care that told her someone had been up early. She swung her legs over the edge of the bed and stood, barefoot on the hardwood floor, the oversized sweatpants still loose around her hips. Quietly, she cracked open the door and stepped into the hall. The apartment smelled of coffee and something sweet. Sunlight spilled in through the tall windows, catching motes of dust in midair. In the kitchen, Malcolm stood at the stove, back to her, stirring a small pot. He wore a plain white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, the kind that made him look almost unrecognizably humanless, like the tech mogul she'd read about in articles, and more like a man who woke up alone too often. She paused at the doorway, not wanting to disturb the moment, but he turned anyway, sensing her before she spoke. "Morning," he said, his voice calm even. She offered a small smile. "Morning. Sleep okay?" She nodded. "Better than I have in weeks." He motioned to the counter. "Have a seat. Oatmeal and coffee, nothing fancy." Layla slid onto the stool, watching him as he moved through the kitchen. Efficient, focused, but not hurried. She found herself studying him in the same way she observed her students reading the small tells. The way he wiped the rim of the coffee cup before handing it over. The quiet check he made of the stovetop after turning it off. The way he didn't ask if she wanted sugar, just passed it to her like he knew she might need something to hold. She took a sip. It was just the way she liked it. She hadn't told him that. "You always cook breakfast for strangers?" she teased gently. He raised an eyebrow. "You're not a stranger anymore." The words lingered in the air, warm and weightless. They ate mostly in silence, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt, in a strange way, like two people sharing a table in an old diner, both too tired to fill the air with noise. Just the clink of spoons and the occasional sigh. "Finally," Layla said, "I should get going soon. I've got class this afternoon." He nodded slowly, not protesting. "I'll have the driver take you." She hesitated. "You don't have to do that. I can catch the T. The trains are still delayed. I checked. Roads are clear enough now. It's no trouble." She didn't argue, not because she agreed, but because something about the way he said it made it hard to say no. Not controlling, not overstepping, just unwavering. She looked around again. "This place, it's beautiful. It doesn't feel empty." Malcolm shrugged. "It's lived in, that's all." She tilted her head. "You live alone?" He met her eyes. "Always have." Something flickered behind his expression. Not pain, exactly. Just the echo of it. "My mom lived alone too," Layla said quietly. "After Dad left, she raised me by herself. Worked nights at the pharmacy. Never had time to sit down." Malcolm nodded, eyes still on her. "My mom raised me solo too. In Baltimore. She passed when I was 17. Layla's throat tightened. "I'm sorry. She was tired all the time," he said softly. "But she never let it show. Except in the silence, when I'd catch her staring at nothing with her coffee half full. I think the world got too heavy for her some days." Layla's fingers gripped the edge of her cup. "I know that silence." They didn't speak for a moment, just sat in the small ache of shared memory. Then he said, "That coat you were wearing last night, it wasn't enough for the cold." She looked down, suddenly self-conscious. "It's what I had. Money's tight. I send most of it home." He didn't pity her. She could tell. He just listened. She added, "I don't usually end up stranded. I time things right. Just last night, I stayed too long with one of the kids. He's been struggling with math. Reminds me of me when I was 10. You didn't want to leave him." "No," she said. "He needed someone to believe he could get it." Malcolm's jaw shifted. There it was again, that quiet respect. The kind no one ever gave her when she was working double shifts or walking home in the cold. The kind that said, "I see you." She stood then, carefully. "I should shower, if that's okay." He nodded toward the hall. Towels are under the sink. Take your time. When she left the kitchen, Malcolm stared at her half-empty bowl for a long while. Then his eyes drifted to the guest room door, and he thought about how quiet his place had been before she arrived. Not empty, but never full. In the bathroom, as Layla washed the steam from her face, she caught her own reflection in the mirror-tired eyes, chapped lips, hair pulled into a loose bun, but there was color in her cheeks again. Something returning. She didn't know what this was, what last night meant, what this morning meant, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to run. And that was enough for now. Layla stepped out of the building into the late morning chill, the kind of cold that no longer bit at her bones but still reminded her winter hadn't left. Malcolm's driver was already waiting by the curb, a black town car glistening clean against the slush-covered street. The man gave her a polite nod and opened the door. She turned back once, glancing up at the quiet windows of Malcolm's apartment. There was no movement behind the glass, but she could feel something settle in her chest, an awareness she hadn't expected. A warmth she wasn't ready to name. The ride back to campus was silent, except for the radio playing a gentle jazz track. Layla sat tucked beneath the same coat Malcolm had wrapped around her last night, now clean and folded over her lap. Her phone had charged just enough to buzz twice with emails and once with a message from her roommate. "Where the hell are you? You good?" She didn't answer. Not yet. When they pulled into the drop-off circle outside the dorms, the driver handed her a small paper bag. "He asked me to give you this," he said with a faint smile before pulling away. Inside the bag, a thermos of hot coffee, a wrapped muffin, and a note written in a precise, angular script. "Drink something, eat something, rest when you can." Layla stared at the note longer than she should have. Her heart tugged in a direction her head didn't approve of. She wasn't someone who swooned over men with luxury apartments and expensive cars. She'd built her identity on independence, on resilience, on holding it all together without needing anyone. But damn if he didn't make it hard to remember that. That afternoon, in Professor Halbrook's Modern Education and Equity class, Layla sat near the back, trying to focus on the slides. The lecture blurred. Her mind kept drifting to the way Malcolm had looked at her across the kitchen counter, to the photo of his mother above the fireplace, to the silence they'd shared without discomfort. She was still distracted when class ended and a classmate slid into the seat beside her. "So you and Malcolm Brooks, huh?" Layla's head snapped toward the voice. It was Tasha, another education major, with 2 perfect curls and 2 wide eyes. She smiled like a cat that had found something fragile to play with. "I saw you get out of his car," she added casually. "Figured you must be dating or something." "We're not," Layla replied quickly. Too quickly. Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Okay, just looked real cozy, that's all." Layla gathered her things without answering. But as she walked out of the classroom, she felt heat rising in her chest, not from embarrassment, something sharper, anger, frustration, the kind that came from being seen, but not really seen. At her work-study shift in the tutoring center that evening, Layla could barely focus. She smiled through vocabulary drills and math worksheets, but her thoughts swam. When her last student left, she sat alone in the quiet room, watching the snow drift outside the window. A text buzzed on her phone. "Malcolm, how was your day?" She didn't answer right away. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She wanted to tell him about Tasha, about how small people made her feel when she dared to step outside her lane. But she didn't. Instead, she typed, "Busy, tired, still alive." He responded within seconds. "That's not enough. Let me pick you up." She stared at the message, heart thudding. She should say no. She should keep this separate. But all she did was type, "Okay." 30 minutes later, she slid into the passenger seat of his car once again. It was warmer this time, like her body remembered it. "You look exhausted," he said, eyes on the road. "I am." They didn't talk much as he drove. Instead, he took her to a small diner just outside the city, a quiet, no-frills place that smelled like melted butter and cinnamon. The waitress greeted Malcolm by name and brought them a booth in the back without asking. "You come here often?" Layla asked as she sat down. "When I can't sleep," he replied, unfolding his napkin, "which is most nights." She looked at him, really looked. Beneath the perfect suit jackets and calm exterior, there was something restless in him, a loneliness that mirrored her own. "I used to come to places like this with my mom." Layla said after a moment. Back when we could afford one meal out every few weeks, we'd split pancakes and pretend it was a feast. Malcolm smiled softly. We did the same thing. Except ours was fried chicken in a paper box, sitting on the hood of her car. No music, just the streetlights. There was a silence. But this one was rich, filled with memories that didn't need words. Over dinner, they didn't talk about business or classes. They talked about books they never finished, songs that made them cry for no reason. Layla told him about her student Luis, who asked her last week if he was too dumb for decimals. She told him how she made him recite math affirmations like they were magic spells. Malcolm listened like it mattered, like it was sacred. On the drive home, snow had begun again, light but steady. As the city lights passed across her face, Layla turned to him and asked, "Do people ever misread you?" "All the time," he said. "Yeah, me too." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "How do you handle it?" "I remind myself that they don't get to define my story." He nodded slowly. "That's harder than it sounds." She smiled. "I never said I was good at it." When he dropped her off, he didn't walk her in, just waited until she was at the door before rolling down the window and saying, "Text me when you're inside." Layla nodded, already typing. And as she stepped inside her dorm, coat still carrying his scent, heart caught somewhere between fear and something dangerously close to longing, she realized she was standing at the edge of two worlds. One where she was a girl surviving, and one where, for the first time, someone made her wonder if surviving was all there needed to be. The hallway smelled like overbrewed coffee and old printer ink, a scent Layla had come to associate with both exhaustion and perseverance. It was nearing 10 p.m. at the Community Learning Center downtown, and the heating system clicked and groaned like it was ready to give up, just like her. She had been there since 3 p.m., tutoring back-to-back sessions after her morning classes. 6th graders, 9th graders, GED prep. She had skipped dinner, missed lunch, and ignored the dull headache building behind her eyes. Her plan was simple: finish this last session, catch the train back, crawl into bed, and maybe reply to Malcolm's last message. "Did you eat today?" it had read. The boy in front of her, Eli, 11 years old, all elbows and nervous questions, fumbled over his long division again, and Layla smiled despite the way her stomach twisted. "Try again," she whispered, gently pointing to the remainder. "You're closer than you think." He tried. He got it wrong again. She leaned in to explain, and that's when the room tilted. The edges of her vision blurred. Her breath hitched. The numbers on the page swam into nonsense. She heard Eli ask, "Are you okay, Miss Layla?" But she couldn't answer. Her knees buckled, the world caved in, and everything went black. She came to slowly, voices muffled and overlapping. She fainted, just collapsed. Blood sugar, probably. Someone call an ambulance? No, wait, she's waking up. The ceiling above her was off-white, a tile missing in one corner. She was lying on the floor. Her hands felt heavy, her throat dry. Someone had placed a folded jacket under her head. The air was cold. Her mouth moved, but nothing came out. And then, like a film sharpening into focus, she saw him, Malcolm, kneeling beside her, his hand gently gripping hers, his face tight, unreadable, except for the wild concern in his eyes. "How?" she managed to whisper. "You listed me as your emergency contact," he said, voice low, almost clipped. "They called me 10 minutes ago. I was already on my way." She blinked. She didn't remember doing that, had she? A volunteer offered to help Malcolm move her to the car, but he waved them off with a look that silenced any protest. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms just as he had that night at the bus stop. But this time, she didn't feel like someone found. She felt like someone being retrieved, reclaimed. The ride back was quiet. Malcolm drove this time, not his driver. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his jaw set. Layla sat slumped in the passenger seat, too tired to speak, her head resting against the cold glass. Back at his apartment, he carried her in again. But it felt different now, charged, tense, like a dam about to burst. He laid her down on the couch, pulled off her shoes, wrapped her in a blanket. Then he stepped back, staring at her like he didn't know what to say, or perhaps like he had too much to say. "You didn't answer my texts," he said finally, quietly. I know, she whispered. You've been pushing yourself too hard. Again. She didn't answer. Her throat closed. I told you to let me help, he added, almost a whisper now, but sharp enough to sting. Her fingers curled into the blanket. And I told you I can handle it. He exhaled through his nose, turned away for a moment, then faced her again. Passing out in a tutoring center isn't handling it, Layla. That's burning out. I'm fine. No, you're not. I don't need you to fix me, Malcolm. The words cracked out of her like a thunderclap, and the silence afterward was deafening. He stepped back like she'd hit him. She sat up slowly, her voice trembling now. I've been taking care of myself since I was 15. I've worked 2 jobs since I was 17. I didn't ask to be rescued. I didn't ask for this. He said nothing. She swallowed. Her throat felt tight, her eyes burning. You want to help? That's kind. But don't mistake kindness for control. I don't want to owe anyone anything, not even you. Finally, he spoke, but the edge was gone. This isn't about control. Then what is it? He paused. A long, aching pause. You matter to me, he said. The room went still. She blinked, slowly. I didn't expect it, he continued. Didn't plan for it. But you matter. And watching you hurt yourself trying to be invincible, watching you give everything to everyone else but leave nothing for yourself, it's killing me. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek without permission. I don't know how to accept that, she whispered. No one's ever said I mattered before, not without expecting something in return. I don't want anything from you, he said, except maybe for you to stop walking through storms without a coat. A breath of laughter escaped her lips, shaky but real. When she opened her eyes again, he was closer, kneeling in front of her. His hand reached for hers but didn't take it. I don't want to break down in front of you, she murmured. It feels weak. It's not, he said. It's just human. She looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, she saw not the CEO, not the calm stranger in a suit, but a man with a matching ache inside him. One who understood what it meant to hold yourself together so tightly. You forgot how to fall apart safely. Slowly, she placed her hand in his. I'm tired, Malcolm, she said. So tired. Then rest, he whispered, and let someone hold the weight for a while. She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away, either. And for that night, just one night, Layla let herself be held. Not because she was weak, but because she was finally ready to stop being alone. The apartment was quiet, too quiet. The kind of silence that didn't just linger, it pressed in. It filled the corners of the room like fog, like grief. Malcolm stood by the window, one hand on the glass, watching the city move far below. The snow had stopped, but its memory clung to the rooftops, soft and weightless. Behind him, Layla sat curled on the couch, wrapped in his coat. Her hands cradled a mug of tea she hadn't touched. Her eyes were puffy. Not from tears, there hadn't been many of those, but from the kind of exhaustion that seeps into the marrow. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, flyaways lit by the afternoon sun. Her voice hadn't returned since the night before, not fully. She had slept, yes, but it was the sleep of someone worn out, not someone at peace. And Malcolm, he had barely rested at all. He'd paced the floor like a ghost, stopped only when he'd heard her breathing deepen. Now they were here, together. But something was slipping. Thank you for letting me stay, she said finally, her voice low. He turned to look at her, arms folded across his chest like a shield. You don't have to thank me, Layla. She gave a faint smile. I think I do. She stood, setting the mug down with care. She had changed back into her own clothes, the same ones she'd collapsed in. Clean now, but still too thin. The sleeves tugged at her wrists. The shoes looked like they wanted to be anything but what she had to rely on. He watched as she walked to the hallway, pulling her bag up onto her shoulder. He wanted to stop her. He wanted to say all the things he'd swallowed over the past few weeks, but his mouth stayed closed. Layla paused by the door, turning back to face him. You know what the hardest part is? He didn't speak. It's not the money, not the cold, not even the loneliness, she said. It's that when something good shows up, I don't know how to trust it. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to. I spent years believing that if I kept my head down, if I just worked hard enough, life would get better. But life didn't get better. I just got better at pretending I was okay. Ugh. Malcolm took a step forward. You don't have to pretend here. She nodded slowly. I know. That's what makes this so hard. There at Washnesty, bare and aching. I've started to care about you, she said. Too much. And that scares me. Because I don't know what I am to you. A guest? A project? Something you saved on a snowy night because you couldn't save someone else? He flinched, just barely. She saw it. I'm not her, Malcolm. I'm not your mother. I know, he said quietly. I don't want to be part of someone else's redemption story. I just want to be wanted for me. Messy, loud, tired, hopeful me. You are, he said, his voice hoarse. But she shook her head. You don't say it. His jaw clenched. Because I don't want to ruin it. You don't ruin something by naming it, she said. You ruin it by making someone guess. Silence stretched between them like a tightrope. Then she stepped forward, took his hand gently in hers, and said, I love you, Malcolm. His eyes widened. I think I have for a while now, she continued. But I need to know if we mean something beyond warm coats and guest rooms. He looked down, then back up, and what she saw in his face was not rejection. It was fear. But he said nothing. That was all the answer she needed. Layla leaned in and kissed his cheek, soft and final. Then she let go of his hand and turned toward the door. He didn't move. She opened it, stepped out into the hallway, and pulled it shut behind her. The sound of it closing echoed like a held breath finally exhaled. Malcolm stood frozen, hand halfway raised. Lips parted like he might call after her, but no sound came. Minutes passed. Or maybe they were hours. The coat she had worn still hung on the hook. Her mug still sat on the counter. Her scent still lingered faintly in the room. He walked to the kitchen slowly, picked up the mug, and stared into the half-cold tea. Then he turned his gaze to the couch where she had curled up just the night before, and for the first time in years, he felt something crack. He sat down heavily, elbows on his knees, and let his hands hang limp. She had walked away because he couldn't speak what was inside him, because he hadn't learned how. He wanted to believe she would come back, that she knew him well enough to wait. But Layla was not someone who waited for doors to open themselves. She was someone who knocked once and then walked away if no one answered. And he had stood there in the silence, too afraid to speak, and watched her leave. It wasn't heartbreak that followed. It was the unbearable awareness of what his silence had cost. She didn't slam the door. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just left with grace and dignity, and the last sliver of warmth he hadn't known he was still holding on to. He sat there until the sun dipped behind the skyline, until the room was bathed in quiet dusk. Then, slowly, he reached into the side drawer of the console table and pulled out a small, folded paper. It was the note Layla had left one morning, tucked into the cover of a borrowed book. It read, "You make the world quieter. That's why I like being near you." He read it 3 times before folding it again. Then he stood, walked to the window, and whispered so low that even the walls could barely hear it. "I love you too." But she wasn't there to hear it. And maybe that was the point. The days that followed moved like water under ice floe, muted and threatening to crack. Malcolm returned to his routines, or at least the shell of them. He showed up to his office. He responded to emails. He nodded in meetings and signed approvals. But something in him had detached. The sharpness that once made him formidable in business meetings was dulled. His assistant noticed first, then his CFO. They asked if he was unwell. He lied and said he was just tired. But it wasn't fatigue. It was absence. Layla's presence, though brief, had altered the texture of his life. She hadn't just walked through his door, she had breathed warmth into corners of his world he hadn't realized were cold. Now those corners echoed with her missing voice, the memory of her laugh, the scent of lavender and chai that still lingered on the blanket she used on the couch. He didn't move the blanket. He didn't wash the mug. Her photo snapped candidly on a snowy afternoon in the park, half laughing as she squinted into the wind remained tucked behind a book on his shelf. He didn't have the heart to move it, but he didn't have the courage to look at it either. For a week, he told himself she needed space, that she was figuring things out, that he could give her time. But the silence grew louder. On the 8th day, Malcolm found himself driving to the community learning center where she used to tutor. He parked across the street and watched the entrance. Kids came and went. A few college students milled around the steps, but not her. He didn't go in. Instead, he sat in his car and remembered the way she had talked about her student show. She'd described their victories like they were Olympic medals. How her voice softened when she mentioned Luis, or Shayna, or the twins who used to bring her homemade bracelets. He didn't realize his hand had drifted to the steering wheel's leather, clutching it tighter than necessary. Later that evening, he went home, opened his laptop, and stared at an email he had drafted a week ago. It was never sent. Just a blank subject line and 2 words in the body. I'm sorry. He deleted it. Then he opened a different tab and searched for her name. Layla Johnson, Boston University. The results came slowly: volunteer photos, a few local interviews from a campus literacy initiative, and then, tucked deep in a sidebar link from the university newsletter, an announcement: Layla Johnson awarded the Larkson Fellowship for Community Educators. The ceremony was in 2 days. It was open to the public. Malcolm leaned back in his chair, heart heavy. He wasn't sure if it was hope blooming or guilt tightening its grip. 2 days later, he arrived early. The event was held in a community center downtown, modest but filled with people dressed in their Sunday best. Parents, professors, students, neighborhood leaders. The stage was small, decorated with blue curtains and folding chairs. Malcolm stayed in the back. He didn't want to be seen. He didn't want to distract. And then he saw her. Layla walked on stage in a navy dress with sleeves that brushed her elbows, her curls pulled back simply, her expression composed but not guarded. There was something different about her posture, stronger, more grounded, as if the choice to walk away hadn't broken her, but rooted her deeper into herself. She accepted her award with a soft thank you, then stepped to the podium. I've spent most of my life working hard to prove I belonged, she began, voice steady. In classrooms where people assumed I was the helper, not the leader. In jobs where I was expected to smile through exhaustion. In spaces where kindness was mistaken for weakness. She paused. But I've learned something these past few months. That being strong doesn't mean doing everything alone. That sometimes, letting someone care for you is the bravest thing you can do. Malcolm swallowed hard. I'm still learning that lesson, she continued, eyes scanning the crowd but never reaching him. But I'm grateful for the people known and unknown who reminded me I didn't have to earn my worth. That I already had it. Applause filled the room as she stepped down. He didn't go to her after the event. He couldn't. Not yet. Instead, he slipped out quietly and walked 3 blocks to a flower shop he remembered. The same shop she once pointed to in passing and said, "That place always smells like spring, even in February." Inside, he asked for white tulips. The clerk wrapped them carefully. He didn't leave a note. That evening, he stood at the steps of her dorm, unsure if she still lived there. He waited in the cold until a student opened the front door. He stepped inside the foyer, placed the flowers on the mail table near the front desk, and left. He didn't expect a reply. But the next day, around sunset, his phone buzzed. Layla. I saw the tulips. He stared at the screen, heart lurching. Another message followed. They're my favorite. You remembered. He didn't know what to say. Every word he typed felt like too much or not enough. She sent one more message. I'm not ready to come back, but I haven't stopped thinking about that night. Or what you didn't say. He took a breath, thumb hovering over the screen. Then he replied, neither have I. It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a promise. But it was something. And for a man who had spent a lifetime mastering silence, that night, Malcolm Brooks chose to stay in the conversation. A week passed. No more messages came. No tulips. No knocks. Just silence again, but this time, it felt different. Not the hollow kind that fills an empty room. More like a pause between verses. A breath between chapters. Layla found herself checking her phone more often. Not obsessively, not out of desperation, but with that quiet hopefulness people carry after hearing a song they're not ready to forget. She hadn't replied to Malcolm's last message. She didn't know how. She wasn't sure what she needed from him or what she had left to give. But his words stayed with her, tucked into her memory like a coat pocket secret. Neither have I. That sentence followed her on her walks to class, in the tutoring sessions, in the stolen moments when she let herself feel instead of perform. One night, after a particularly long shift tutoring a boy who refused to read anything not about dinosaurs, Layla stopped by a tiny diner near the Charles River. She sat in the corner booth, her laptop untouched, her tea untouched, just watching the fog roll over the water beyond the window. It was the kind of place you went when you needed to feel small and safe at the same time. That's when she saw the old woman. She must have been in her late 70s, alone, stirring her soup without eating. Her hands trembled slightly. Her purse sat in her lap like a fragile artifact. Layla didn't know why she stood up, or why she crossed the room, only that something in her recognized the stillness in that woman's eyes. "Mind if I sit with you?" Layla asked. The woman looked up. Her eyes were pale blue, slightly clouded, but aware. "Depends," she said with a faint smile. "You gonna eat this soup for me?" Layla laughed softly. "Only if you let me buy dessert after." They talked for nearly an hour. About nothing. About everything. The woman's name was Ruth. She had once been a public school teacher, had 3 children, lost her husband in '92. And when she asked Layla why she looked so far away, Layla hesitated. Then she spoke. About her mom. About Boston. About the night in the snow and the man who carried her like she weighed nothing and everything all at once. She didn't say his name, but she didn't have to. When she finished, Ruth sipped her tea and said, "You know, sweetie, there's 2 kinds of men in this world. The ones who wait for you to fall and the ones who build their arms like nets before you do. Only problem is, most people are too bruised to know which is which." Layla didn't answer. She just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Later that night, when she returned to her apartment, she sat on the edge of her bed and whispered something she hadn't dared say aloud. "I miss you, Malcolm." Not even 24 hours later, her phone rang. Not a text. A call. His name lit up the screen like a match in the dark. She hesitated, then answered. "Layla," Malcolm's voice came through, low and cautious. "I hope this isn't too much. I'm glad you called," she said quickly, surprising herself. There was a pause. Then he laughed soft, almost disbelieving. "I've been rehearsing that call for a week. I've been waiting to pick up for the same amount of time." They didn't talk about the night she left. Not directly. Instead, they talked about her students, his board meetings, the strange comfort of routines, and the ache of unfinished moments. They talked for 2 hours, then agreed to meet for coffee. Public place. No pressure. He arrived 5 minutes early. She arrived 10 minutes late. But when she walked through the door, the way Malcolm looked up, it was like gravity shifted. He stood, not rushed, not forced, and smiled like he'd found something he didn't even realize he'd lost. Layla wore a wool coat buttoned all the way up, gloves still on. Her curls were pulled back in a bun that didn't quite hold. There were circles under her eyes, but they were honest. They didn't hug, but their eyes did. Over coffee, they talked around the subject. Then they circled closer, until finally, Layla reached forward and touched the rim of her mug. "Do you know the hardest part of that night?" she asked. Malcolm looked up, expression open. "I didn't know if I could trust what I felt, if it was real or if I just wanted it to be." His hands remained still, folded on the table. "I didn't know either," he admitted, "but I never doubted that I wanted you safe. That part was always true." She nodded. "I wasn't running from you," she added. "I was running from what it meant to need someone, to let someone see me. Not okay." Malcolm's voice dropped. "Then maybe we both needed space, to know it wasn't just about that night." She met his gaze. "And what if it still is? What if everything changed in that one frozen hour?" He leaned forward. "Then I'm glad it snowed." She smiled. A real one. Small, but unmistakably hers. They left the cafe an hour later. He offered to walk her home. She said yes. As they walked side by side down Tremont Street, snow began to fall again, soft. Silent flakes landing in her hair, on his shoulders. No one said anything. No plans. No promises. But just before they reached her door, she stopped and looked up at him. "If I fall again," she said, barely more than a breath, "don't catch me." He looked confused. "Just walk beside me," she added. "That's all I need." He reached out, gently brushing snow from her sleeve. "Then that's exactly what I'll do." And they stood there, 2 people not fixing each other, not saving but simply choosing to stay. Snow had returned to Boston like a memory, slow, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. Layla stood by her apartment window, watching the flurries brush against the glass in a dance both familiar and unnerving. It had been almost a year since that night on the bench, since Malcolm had lifted her out of the cold without asking for permission, since he whispered, "You're safe with me. Let's go." That night had split her life in two before and after trust, before and after being seen. Now, everything had settled into something she couldn't quite name. Not love, not yet, but not uncertainty either. They met twice a week now, sometimes for coffee, sometimes in bookstores, sometimes just to walk in silence. And even when words didn't come easily, the presence between them did. Malcolm had changed too. His company had started a community initiative free tutoring for underprivileged high school students in Roxbury. Layla had helped him design the pilot program. She didn't want her name attached to it, just her ideas. She still tutored at the university, still worked long hours. But now she had a key to his apartment, not to live, not yet, but just to use the piano in the den when the world got too loud. On the first anniversary of the night they met, Malcolm sent her a single text, "Meet me where it started." And so she did. She bundled herself in a long camel coat and navy scarf, boots lined with fleece, and gloves her grandma had knitted. Her hair was tucked into a beanie, and as she walked through the soft snow, a strange quiet followed her. It wasn't fear. It was something gentler, anticipation laced with memory. When she arrived at the bus stop, Malcolm was already there. No car, no driver, just him, standing near the bench where she had once curled into herself, half frozen, in a thin dress and worn sweater. This time, there was a small portable heater beside him, and on the bench a folded quilt, a thermos of hot cocoa, and 2 chocolate croissants. He smiled when he saw her. "You're late." "You're absurd," she said, already laughing as she stepped closer. He picked up the thermos and handed it to her. "I thought about that night, a lot. About how scared you must have been, and how close I came to making it worse." She shook her head. "You didn't make it worse. You didn't make it better either. You just showed up." That's what I remember. They sat in silence for a few minutes. The cocoa was sweet and familiar, the air between them, warm even in the cold. Then Malcolm reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in tissue. "I wanted to give you this here. Not because it's dramatic," he said, smirking, "but because this spot means more to me than 1,000 rooftop restaurants or beach sunsets." She unwrapped the bundle slowly. Inside was a silver pendant, shaped like a snowflake, intricate, delicate, and imperfect in the center. "It's flawed," she murmured, running her thumb along the center ridge. "Like that night, like me, like you." "But it held," he said softly. "And I think what we're building, it's supposed to hold too." She looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, she didn't see the CEO, the sharp suits, or the mansion overlooking Beacon Hill. She saw the man who had waited in silence, who had let her come back in pieces, who had never once tried to smooth the jagged edges. "You know," she whispered, "I almost didn't let you carry me that night." "I know," he nodded, "and I never would have blamed you if you hadn't." She blinked back, something sudden in her eyes. "But you did, and I didn't stop you." A pause. "I guess that was the moment I started to believe again." Malcolm took her gloved hand. "And I've been walking beside you ever since." They stayed until the sun began to dip, casting orange light across the snow. People passed them, some curious, some indifferent. No one interrupted. Just before they stood to leave, Layla turned to him and said, "You said I was safe with you, but what if now it's me who wants to protect you?" He smiled, a little caught off guard. "From what?" She looked down, then back up. "From loneliness. From believing no one sees you back. From thinking you have to hold everyone else together but never be held yourself." For a moment, Malcolm didn't answer. Then he pulled her close, not dramatically, not like in a movie, just enough so that her head rested on his shoulder. "I don't feel alone when you're here," he said into her hair, "and that's not something I ever expected." They walked home in silence, again. But this silence wasn't the absence of words. It was the presence of trust, and sometimes that's louder than anything else.